You know, this conflict has been simmering for decades. It's this clash of ideologies and ambitions that always feels like it's about to boil over into a full-blown war. Today, we're going to unpack the incredibly complex standoff between the United States and Iran, a story of oil, power, and a very dangerous game of nuclear chess. So picture this. In one corner, you've got a military titan, right, armed with the absolute most advanced tech money can buy. And in the other, you have a scrappy contender that's learned how to turn its weaknesses into its biggest strengths. This right here is the heart of the US-Iran military standoff. It's a classic David versus Goliath story, just with a 21st century twist. And here's the crazy part. That inexpensive Iranian tech has actually proven it can take out some of America's most sophisticated military hardware. I mean, think about it. A drone that cost a couple $1,000 successfully destroyed a radar system worth hundreds of millions. This isn't just a military upset. It's a fundamental challenge to the way we even think about modern warfare. So this all begs a couple of huge questions, right? How on earth did a regional power figure out a way to challenge a global superpower? And maybe more importantly, why? Why did these two countries, who were once allies, become such sworn enemies? To find the answers, we really have to peel back the layers of history, economics, and military strategy. Okay, to really get what's happening today, we've got to rewind the clock a bit, back into the 20th century. And you might be surprised to hear this, but the US and Iran, they were once pretty close allies. So what happened? How did things go so wrong? Let's dig in. Well, like so many things in the Middle East, it all started with oil. Back in 1951, Iran's democratically elected prime minister decided to nationalize their oil industry, basically taking it back from Western companies. Unsurprisingly, the US and Britain were not happy about that. 2 years later, in 1953, the CIA and MI6 helped stage a coup that got rid of him and put the pro-American Shah back on the throne. And for the next quarter century, the Shah ruled with US backing. But all that resentment just bubbled under the surface until it finally exploded in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Shah was gone, Ayatollah Khomeini was in, and the US instantly became the Great Satan. But you know, this isn't just about old grudges or historical beefs. It actually goes way deeper. It's about the very foundation of our modern global economy. To really understand why Iran is seen as such a threat to the US, you have to look at the system that holds up American economic power.
So, in the 1970s, the US dollar wasn't backed by gold anymore, and Washington needed a way to make sure the world still demanded its currency. The solution was genius: the petrodollar system. The deal is pretty simple. The world's biggest oil producers, led by Saudi Arabia, would agree to sell their oil only in US dollars.
And this creates this amazing, self-reinforcing cycle. See, the whole world needs dollars to buy oil, so there's constant demand for the currency. Then, the oil-producing countries take all those billions of dollars and invest them right back into the US economy, buying things like treasury bonds. This helps fund the American government and its massive military. And what do those countries get in return? They get military protection from the US, which keeps the whole system humming along. And this is where it gets really serious, because challenging this system, it has historically come with a very, very steep price. Leaders like Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, they both talked about selling their oil in other currencies, trying to ditch the dollar. And we all know how that ended for them. This history is definitely not lost on Iran, which, with its huge oil reserves and total defiance of the US, is a direct existential threat to that very system. So, if you're Iran, and you've watched what happened to those other leaders who challenged the system, what do? Well, you go looking for the one thing you believe can guarantee your survival against a superpower. You go for the ultimate insurance policy, a nuclear program.
And here's the incredible irony. It was the US that first gave Iran nuclear technology way back in the 1950s when they were friends. But after the '79 revolution, that whole relationship just spiraled into this tense cycle of diplomacy, sanctions, sabotage, and constant escalation. The 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, was supposed to be a pause button on all of that. But when the US pulled out in 2018, it just threw everything back onto a dangerous path. And now Iran is closer than it has ever been to being able to build a bomb.
Now, what's so critical to get here is just how close Iran is. See, enriching uranium to 60% purity, that's the really hard part of the process. Getting from 60% to the 90% you need for a weapon is actually a relatively quick step. With a breakout time, that's the time it would take to make enough material for one bomb, of just 12 days, Iran has basically crossed a major red line for the US and its allies in the region. So Iran knows it can't go toe-to-toe with the US in a conventional war. It's just not going to happen. So what do? They change the rules of the game. They've developed this whole strategy of asymmetric warfare, a way of fighting back that's both cheap and, honestly, surprisingly effective. They call it forward defense. The idea is, instead of waiting for a fight on your own soil, you project your power across the Middle East through this network of allied groups, what's often called the axis of resistance. They fund and arm groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen. You combine that with a huge arsenal of cheap but deadly drones and missiles, often hidden away in massive underground missile cities, and Iran can challenge its enemies without ever having to fire a shot from inside its own borders. But Iran's most powerful weapon might not be a missile at all. It might just be its geography. It sits right on one side of the Strait of Hormuz, which is the single most critical oil choke point on the entire planet. An absolutely astonishing 20%, a full 1/5 of the world's daily oil supply, has to pass through that tiny little waterway. And that's the key, right? Iran doesn't have to win a naval battle against the entire US Navy. All it has to do is make that narrow strait too dangerous for commercial ships to pass through. By just threatening that vital waterway, Iran can essentially hold the global economy hostage, send oil prices soaring, and strike a direct blow at the heart of the petrodollar system. So you put it all together, diplomacy has basically failed. Economic sanctions are pushing everyone to their limits, and military red lines are constantly being crossed. The potential for a full-scale regional war has become terrifyingly real, and the consequences, well, they would be felt by everyone. Yeah, a war like this wouldn't be contained. Its impact would be everywhere. Globally, you'd see oil prices just go through the roof, and you could see submarine internet cables being severed, messing with the world's data flow. But regionally, it's even more horrifying. You're talking about the destruction of desalination plants that provide 60% of the Gulf's fresh water, cutting off 90% of food imports, which would lead to widespread famine, and a massive refugee crisis that would completely destabilize the entire region. So we're left right here, on a knife's edge. Decades of sanctions, of cyber attacks, of targeted strikes, they've all just seemed to push Iran further down this dangerous road. With Iran now on the cusp of having a nuclear weapon and its proxy forces more active than ever, the US is facing a really stark choice. The question isn't really if this standoff will reach a boiling point anymore, but when, and what the world will look like after it does.